You touch a weapon on my firebase medic, and I'll break your hand before the enemy ever gets the chance. Senior Chief Daniel Rourke slammed the rifle case shut an inch from Ava Mitchell's finger, and 12 men laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all week. She had just told him exactly where the enemy sniper would fire from. He told her to bandage knees and keep her mouth shut. 41 days later, that same man would scream her name across a valley of fire. If you're watching, subscribe, follow this story to the very end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. They called her the Doc, and they said it the way you'd say the janitor. At Firebase Ridge Point, 7,000 feet up, where the air came thin and the night bit down to the bone, Sergeant Ava Mitchell had learned the exact shape of being invisible. She knew which men would step around her in the chow line without seeing her. She knew which ones would hand her their sprained wrists and twisted ankles without once meeting her eyes. She knew the sound of her own name being used like a punchline, and she'd stopped letting it land a long time ago. "Doc, you got tape." Corporal Bishop didn't look up from his phone. "I've got tape." "Then earn your keep." She taped his wrist without a word. Her hands were steady. Her hands were always steady. That was the first thing she'd noticed about herself years ago in a place she never talked about, doing a job nobody at Ridgepoint would ever have believed she'd done. Steady hands, slow heartbeat. The world got quiet inside her when everyone else's world got loud. "There," she said, "don't do pull-ups for 3 days." "Yes, ma'am." He grinned, and the ma'am was mockery, and she let it go because letting it go was the whole discipline of her days now. Senior Chief Rourke ran Ridgepoint like it was his private kingdom, and in a way it was. He was built like a man who'd never once been told no, a slab of shoulders and jaw with 22 years in the teams and a chest full of the kind of pins that made younger operators go quiet when he walked past. He had earned every one of them. That was the thing nobody could take from him, and it was the thing that made him dangerous. Because a man who has genuinely been the hardest man in every room he ever walked into stops believing he can be wrong. He had decided on the first day Ava arrived exactly what she was. "Corpsman," he'd said, reading her file without reading it. "Good. We needed somebody to hold the gauze. You do your job, you stay out of my operator's bum, and we'll get along fine." "Understood, Senior Chief." "You don't touch a weapon unless you're dragging it off a body. You don't sit in on tactical briefs. You don't offer opinions on things that aren't blood and bones. Are we clear?" Clear. And that had been that. He'd filed her away in his head under a single word, and the word was small, and he'd never once thought to open the file again. What Rourke didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Ava Mitchell spent every morning of her life at Ridgepoint doing something none of them ever noticed. She counted the wind. Not casually, not the way a man licks a finger and holds it up. She counted it the way other people count breaths in a panic attack, methodical and total every hour on the hour, logging it in a small green notebook she kept zipped in her cargo pocket where nobody looked, because nobody looked at anything she carried. 0600 wind out of the northeast, 4 knots, gusting 6 across the eastern ridgeline where the valley funneled it. 0700 backing to the north. 3 knots dead calm in the low ground by the wadi. She knew the way the morning thermals lifted off the southern slope by 9, the way the afternoon downdraft rolled cold air into the valley floor like water finding its level. She knew the terrain angles better than the men who patrolled them. She knew that the ridge they all called the spine offered exactly 4 positions with clean lines down into the valley, and she knew that 3 of them were obvious and 1 of them wasn't. She knew the range to the far tree line was 860 meters, not the 900 that the intel packet claimed, because she'd ranged it herself quietly from the medical tent's back flap with a device nobody knew she owned. She was not observing the battlefield. She was mapping it, and she was doing it because some part of her, some old and buried and refusing to die part of her, could not stop. Lieutenant Caleb Ward was the first man at Ridgepoint to notice that the doc was strange. He was younger than Rourke by 15 years, and softer around the certainty which at Ridgepoint made him almost a liability, but it also made him the kind of officer who watched people instead of just commanding them. And he'd started watching Ava the way you watch a card trick. You can't figure out the vague itch of knowing that something didn't add up. "You always sit facing the valley," he said one evening, dropping down onto the ammo crate beside her without asking. "Best light for reading." "You're not reading." She looked at the notebook in her lap, closed it. "I'm reading now." "Doc." He said it differently than the others. Not a punchline, a question. "You know you sat down facing that ridge before you even sat down." You check the wind flag on the antenna mast first. Everybody who comes up here flops down wherever. You picked your seat like it mattered. Ava's heart did the thing it always did when she got too close to being seen. It slowed, it got quiet, and she smiled the small, flat, harmless smile that had gotten her through 11 months of Ridgepoint without a single man ever looking twice. I like the view, Lieutenant. There's no view. It's a rock wall and a valley full of nothing. Then I like the nothing. He laughed, but he didn't leave, and that was new. Most men laughed and left. Ward laughed and then stayed, and he kept watching, and something in the back of Ava's mind whispered a warning she'd been ignoring for a very long time. The next morning changed the weight of the air at Ridgepoint, though only Ava felt it. She was crouched in the wadi's edge, irrigating a burn on a private's forearm when she saw it. Movement across the valley on the ridge she had privately named the Tooth, for the way one broken spur of rock jutted up from the crest. It was gone in a half second, less than that, a suggestion of motion that any other person at the firebase would have written off as a bird or a heat shimmer or nothing at all. Ava did not write it off. Ava had spent a lifetime learning that the thing you see for half a second and dismiss is the thing that kills you. Hold still, she told the private, and her voice was so calm he obeyed without thinking. But her eyes were already climbing the far ridge hour by hour of memorized wind between her and that spur of rock, and something old and cold woke up in the base of her spine. She finished the burn dressing. She washed her hands, and then she did the thing that would define the next 41 days of her life. She walked to the command tent and she asked to speak to Senior Chief Rourke. He kept her waiting 11 minutes on purpose. When he finally waved her in, he didn't offer her a seat. "Make it fast, Doc. What is it, somebody get a splinter?" "I saw movement on the eastern ridge. The high spur, the broken one. Single individual, brief exposure moving with intent." Rourke looked at her the way you'd look at a dog that had started reciting poetry. "You saw movement." "Yes, Senior Chief." "On the ridge." "On the high spur. If there's a sniper element scouting overwatch positions against this firebase, that's the one they'd take. It has a clean line to the LZ, to the northern wall, and to the fuel point. Range is 840 meters. The morning wind." "Stop." He held up one broad hand. "Stop right there. I want you to hear yourself. You're a corpsman, you hand out Motrin, and you pack wounds. And you just walked into my command tent to lecture me about overwatch positions and firing ranges like you're some kind of—" He stopped and he actually laughed, and the laugh was worse than anything he could have said. "Range is 840 meters. You even know how you'd know that? You wouldn't. You're guessing. You saw a goat and you got spooked, and now you want to feel important. It wasn't a goat. It was a goat. Senior Chief, if you'd let me walk you through them, stay in your lane." His voice dropped and the whole tent went quiet, and every man in it looked at the floor because they knew that voice. "You're a medic. You will be a medic. And the next time you come in here to play soldier, I will write you up so fast your head spins. Are we clear?" The old Ava, the one from the place she never talked about, wanted to answer him 100 different ways. She had the words. She had the credentials buried and sealed and denied to bury him. But that Ava was gone, or supposed to be gone, and the new one only nodded. "Clear, Senior Chief?" "Good. Get out." She got out, and she did not argue, because arguing was not what she did anymore. What she did was prepare. That was the thing about Ava Mitchell that no one at Firebase Ridgepoint understood, and it was the thing that would eventually save every one of their lives. She did not need them to believe her. Belief was a luxury she'd stopped requiring somewhere in a past she'd sealed shut. She only needed to be right, and she only needed to be ready, and she had decided the moment Rourke said the word goat that she was going to build the thing no one had asked her to build. That night, she started the firing solution. She did it in the medical tent after lights out by the red glow of a headlamp in the green notebook that no one ever thought to open. She wrote the range. She wrote the elevation delta between the firebase and the Tooth. She began the wind log for that specific line, that specific 840 meters. And she started to understand what she was working with, which was the hardest kind of shot in the world. A shot across a valley meant crosswind that changed 3 times over the flight of the bullet thermals, lifting the round in the middle third, and a target that would have every reason in the world to move. She was not a medic building a fantasy. She was a sniper forced to pretend she wasn't doing quietly at night what she had once done for a living and what she had promised herself she would never do again. The next week, Caleb Ward found her at it. Not the notebook, she was too careful for that, but the pattern of her. You range that tree line every day, he said. He'd sat down beside her again, and this time he didn't pretend he'd come for anything else. I watched you. You've got a rangefinder in your left cargo pocket. You pull it out, you range the same 3 points every single morning, and you write in that book. Doc, what are you doing? Ava's slow heart got slower. I'm keeping busy, Lieutenant. You're a corpsman. What's a corpsman need with range data across a valley we don't even patrol? Habit? That's not a habit. That's a job. That's somebody's job. Whose job is it? He leaned in and his voice dropped, and for the first time, a man at Ridgepoint looked at her and started to see the outline of the truth. Who were you before you were the doc? And there it was, the question she had crossed an ocean to never be asked again. I was a medic before I was the doc, she said. There's no story, Lieutenant. I don't believe you. You don't have to. He held her eyes for a long moment, and something passed between them that neither of them named, and then he stood up. But before he left, he said the thing that told her he was not going to let it go. My uncle was a scout sniper. 20 years, I grew up watching him range everything. Trees, fence posts, the neighbor's mailbox. He couldn't stop even after he got out. It was in him like a second heartbeat. Ward looked down at her. You range like him, Doc. Exactly like him. And I've never in my life seen a corpsman do that. Then he walked away, and Ava sat alone with the valley in front of her, and for the first time in 11 months, she felt the seal on her past begin to crack. Rourke, meanwhile, had decided the doc needed to be reminded of her place. It happened 3 days later on the range where the operators cycled through weapons drills that Ava was never permitted to touch. She was there in her role, standing by with the medical bag in case a hot barrel found a careless hand. And it did. Petty Officer Delgado racked a malfunction wrong, pinched the web of his hand between the charging handle and the receiver, and swore loud enough to turn every head. Ava was moving before the swearing stopped. Let me see it. It's fine. Let me see it. She had the hand open, was reading the tear, was reaching for the bag. You caught the skin, not the tendon. You're lucky. Hold pressure. And then, without thinking, doing the thing that had lived in her hands for a decade, she looked at his weapon. Your gas rings are worn. That's your third malfunction this week I've watched it. Swap the bolt, or you'll do this again on the day it counts. The range went dead silent. Rourke walked over slowly. What did you say? His gas rings are worn, Senior Chief. It's a 2-minute fix. You looked at a man's weapon. I looked at why his hand got caught. You are a corpsman. Each word came out separate and hard. You do not diagnose weapons. You do not know what a gas ring is. You do not know what a bolt does. You will explain to me right now how a corpsman knows one single thing about the internal function of an Mk-18. The whole range was watching. 12 operators' faces flat, waiting to see the doc get destroyed. And Ava stood there with a man's blood on her fingers and made the hardest decision she made in her first 11 months at Ridgepoint, which was the decision to lie. I read the maintenance manual, Senior Chief, in case I ever had to clear a weapon off a casualty. Rourke stared at her. He wanted it to be a lie, or he wanted it to be the truth. She could never tell which, only that he wanted her to be small, and she kept somehow refusing to be quite small enough. Delgado, he said finally, not looking away from her, swap your bolt. Yes, Senior Chief. And you, he pointed at Ava. The bag, that's your lane. You live in that bag. Do not make me tell you again. She went back to the bag. But Caleb Ward had been standing 10 feet away, and he had heard every word, and when Ava glanced up, she found him looking at her with an expression that was no longer curiosity. It was something closer to certainty. He knew. He didn't have the shape of it yet, but he knew there was a shape, and she saw the exact moment he decided he was going to find out what it was. That was the night everything tightened. A resupply bird came in at last light and offloaded a pallet of ammunition and tucked in a hard case that got signed for by the armorer, and locked in the cage a single Mk-11 sniper rifle with a day optic and 100 rounds of match grade. Ridgepoint had requested a designated marksman capability for months. Nobody at the firebase was actually qualified to run it. It sat in the cage like a promise no one could keep. And only one person at Ridgepoint looked at that case and felt her whole body go quiet and certain, and that person said nothing at all. But Ward saw her see it. He came to the medical tent after chow, and he didn't sit down and he didn't play the long game this time. He just said it. When that MK-11 came off the bird, you stopped breathing. I don't know what you mean. You looked at it like a man looks at a butt he had to give away. He shut the tent flap behind him, which he'd never done. Doc, Ava, I'm not going to write you up. I'm not Rourke. I just want to understand what's happening on my firebase, because I think there's an enemy element on that eastern ridge. I think you saw it. I think Rourke buried it because it came out of your mouth. And I think you know things about this valley that nobody else here knows. And I think you've spent 11 months making yourself invisible on purpose. I've just spent a week not able to figure out why. Ava looked at him for a long time. The red light of her headlamp painted them both. And the seal on her past cracked another inch because the terrible truth was that she was so tired of carrying it alone. And Caleb Ward was the first man in 11 months who had looked at her and seen a person instead of a role. If I tell you, she said quietly, you have to understand that it stays in this tent. Not because I'm ashamed of it, because the reason I'm invisible is the reason I'm still alive. Ward went still. Okay. There was an operation, she said, overseas. I was part of a program that officially doesn't have women in it doing a job that officially wasn't happening in a country we officially weren't in. And it went bad. It went bad in a way that got people killed, and the fastest way for everyone above me to make the problem disappear was to make me disappear. So they buried the record, and they gave me a new lane, and they told me the best thing I could do for the men who died was to go be a medic and never ever pick up a long gun again. Her voice didn't shake. That was the frightening part. It never shook. I was very good at the thing I'm not allowed to be good at anymore, Lieutenant. Good enough that they were afraid of me being seen. So I made myself not worth seeing. And it worked. It's worked for 11 months. Ward sat down slowly on the crate across from her. The tooth, the eastern spur. You weren't guessing. I was never guessing. How sure are you? And here Ava Mitchell told the truth, the whole cold weight of it, for the first time since she'd arrived at the top of the world. There is a sniper element on that ridge, or there will be. It's the only position with clean lines to everything that matters here, and whoever's setting up over there knows it, which means they're trained, which means they're patient, which means when they finally fire, they're going to fire on a day when this fire base is already committed and can't respond. That's what I would do. That's exactly what I would do. She looked at him, and I've already started building the shot that answers it, in case. In case what? In case the day comes and there's nobody else. The tent was very quiet. Somewhere outside a generator hummed, and a man laughed at something, and the war went on being invisible the way it does right up until it isn't. Rourke will never let you touch that rifle, Ward said finally. I know. Even if you're right, even if they come, he'll die before he hands the doc a long gun. I know that too. So what's the plan? Ava closed the green notebook and zipped it into her pocket, and the small, flat, harmless smile was gone, and what was underneath it was something Ward had never seen on her face and would never forget. The plan, she said, is to be so ready that when the moment comes, being right won't be a request. It'll be the only thing left standing between all of you and the ground. Ward left the tent that night carrying a secret that was too big for him, and Ava went back to the notebook and across the valley, 840 meters away on a broken spur of rock. A patient man who had also spent his life learning to be invisible was doing exactly what she'd said he would do. He was waiting. He was counting the wind. And he was building in his own language the mirror image of the shot Ava Mitchell was building for him. And neither of them knew yet that the whole war between them would come down to who had counted more carefully and who could stay calm when the valley finally came apart. The next morning, Ava logged the wind at 0600, northeast 4 knots gusting 6 across the eastern line. Same as always, same as the day before. She wrote it down in the small green book 41 days before it would matter more than anything else in the world. And she did not know the number yet, and she did not need to. She only needed to be ready. And she was getting there 1 hour of wind at a time in silence, unseen the woman they never saw becoming in secret, the most dangerous person on the mountain. The 41 days did not pass the way days pass for other people. For everyone else at Firebase Ridge Point, One dawn bled into the next the way it always had, chow and patrols and weapons drills and the slow grinding boredom of a war that mostly consisted of waiting for a war. But for Ava Mitchell, every one of those days had a number, and the number was climbing towards something she could feel the way you feel. Weather change in an old wound. Day 39, before it mattered, she logged the wind at 0600 and found it wrong. Not wrong like weather is wrong, wrong like a lie. The morning air out of the northeast that had held 4 knots, gusting 6 for 11 straight months, came in at 2 knots and died. She stood at the back flap of the medical tent with the little green notebook open against her palm, and she felt the hair rise on her arms because a still morning sent a pressure shift, and a pressure shift meant the whole wind pattern of the valley was about to reorganize itself, and she had built 400 lines of firing data on a wind that was no longer true. "You're up early," Caleb Ward said behind her. She didn't turn around. "So's the weather, it's changing, feel it." Ward stepped up beside her and did the thing she'd started to like about him, which was that he actually tried. He held his hand out, flat-turned at frown. "Feels calm." That's the problem. It's never calm here at 6. For 11 months, it's never once been calm. She closed the notebook. "Everything I built assumed a wind that just quit on me. I have to rebuild it. All of it." "How long?" "Days, maybe a week to be sure of the new pattern." She finally looked at him, and there was something in her face that he'd learned to read as fear, though on Ava it looked almost like nothing at all. "If they come inside that week, Lieutenant, I've got a solution built on a lie. And a solution built on a lie is worse than no solution because I'll believe it. I'll pull the trigger believing it." Ward was quiet a moment. Then he said the thing that changed the shape of the next 39 days. "Then I'll help you rebuild it." She turned fully toward him. "You don't know how." "No, but I can hold a rangefinder and read numbers off a wind meter and write them in a book while you tell me what they mean. You said it yourself, you can't be everywhere, so you can't log the wind at the fuel point and the LZ and the Wadi all at 0600. But 2 people can." He shrugged, and it was a young man's shrug, all conviction and no idea what it would cost him. "I'm the assistant patrol officer. Nobody questions where I go. Let me be your second set of eyes." And Ava Mitchell, who had crossed an ocean to work alone, who had made a religion out of needing no one, looked at this lieutenant offering to carry a piece of the weight and felt the seal on her pass crack another inch. "If Rourke finds out," she said, "he doesn't write me up. He writes you up. You've got a career. I've got a bag of gauze and a secret." "Then he won't find out." Day 38, they started. It was slow and it was maddening, and it was the most careful work Ava had done since the country she never named. Ward would drift to the fuel point during his morning rounds, pull the little wind meter from his sleeve pocket, where nobody thought to look, take the reading, and memorize it, because writing it down in the open was a risk neither of them would take. Then he'd find her at the Wadi during her medical rounds and murmur the number like he was asking about a blister. 2 knots, north-northeast, dropping to nothing by the tree line. She'd nod, take the private's pulse, and file it away. By day 35, they had a rhythm. By day 32, they had a new wind pattern for the valley, and it was uglier than the old one. The still mornings meant the thermals came earlier and harder, lifting off the southern slope by 0830 instead of 09, which meant that a bullet crossing the valley in the mid-morning hours would ride a rising column of air right through the middle third of its flight and climb bone. And if you didn't account for it, you'd shoot clean over a man's head and never understand why. "Explain it to me again," Ward said one night in the medical tent, the flap tied shut, the red headlamp painting them both. Slow, like I'm the private. "You are the private. Then teach the private." Ava pulled the green notebook out and turned it to a page she'd covered in her small, hard handwriting. "A bullet doesn't fly straight and it doesn't fly flat. The second it leaves the barrel, it's falling and it's drifting and the air is pushing it around the whole way. At 840 meters, the round I'd be firing is in the air or so a little over a second. Doesn't sound like much. But in that second, the wind gets 3 separate votes." She tapped the page. "Near wind, off my position. Mid-valley wind, which right now is a rising thermal that'll lift the round. Far wind off the tooth, which swirls because of that broken spur. 3 different pushes on the same bullet in the same second. I have to solve all 3 before I press the trigger, because after I press it, the math is done, and the bullet doesn't care what I meant." Ward stared at the numbers. "How does anybody do this?" Most people can't. That's the whole point of the job. She said it flatly, no pride in it, which was somehow worse than pride. You count the wins so many times that you stop counting and you start knowing. And then one day the knowing is all you've got and you find out whether you counted enough. Ward looked up at her. And have you counted enough? Ava was quiet for a long moment. I'm at 32, she said, and didn't explain the number. And Ward didn't ask because he'd figured out by then that she was counting down to something she couldn't see and couldn't stop. Day 30, the enemy showed themselves again, and this time Ava wasn't the only one who saw. It was a patrol coming back in through the northern draw. Delgado on point when a single crack rolled across the valley and a chunk of rock the size of a fist exploded off the wall 2 feet from Delgado's head. The whole patrol hit the dirt. The crack came from the east, from the high ground, from the tooth. Ava was at the aid station when they carried the story in Delgado, white-faced and furious. And she stood very still and listened to men describe in broken pieces the exact thing she'd told Rourke about 39 days ago in the command tent, the thing he'd called a goat. Single shot, Delgado was saying, when, just to let us know he's there, he could have had me. He wanted me to know he could have had me. Range, someone asked. Long, real long, came from way up on that eastern ridge. And Ava, standing by with her bag, could not stop herself. 840 meters, she said quietly. The high spur, the broken one. The tent went silent. Delgado turned and looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. How do you know that? Before she could answer, the flap tore open and Rourke filled the doorway and the temperature in the tent dropped 10 degrees. Everybody out except Delgado, he said. Doc, you stay. The men cleared. Rourke let the flap fall. And then he turned on her with a fury that had been building for 39 days. You want to explain to me, he said low and dangerous, how you knew the range and the position of a shot you didn't see. I told you 39 days ago there was an element on that spur. You said it was a goat. I said stay in your lane. The goat just tried to take Delgado's head off, Senior Chief. It was the closest to defiance she'd come in 11 months, and she watched it land, watched his jaw work, watched the vein come up in his temple. And for one held breath, she thought he might actually hear her. Then his face closed like a door. You got lucky, he said. You saw a shadow one time, and it turned out there's a shooter over there. Congratulations. You know what a shooter over there means? It means my operators are going to find him and put him in the dirt. Real operators, with rifles they're actually qualified to carry, not a corpsman with a notebook and a theory. He stepped in close enough that Delgado shifted uncomfortably in the corner. I catch you talking ranges and positions to my men one more time. I don't care if we're in a firefight. I will have you flown off this mountain and out of this war. Do you understand me? I understand you. Say you understand. I understand, Senior Chief. He held her eyes another second, then walked out. And Delgado, forgotten in the corner, looked at her with something new in his face, something that wasn't mockery for the first time since she'd arrived. Doc, he said quietly. How did you know? Ava picked up her bag. Get some rest, Delgado. Your hands are still shaking. Day 29, Rourke did exactly what Ava knew he'd do. He sent operators up the eastern ridge to clear the tooth. She watched them go from the wadi, 4 men moving up the broken ground toward the spur, and she stood there with a dread so heavy it felt like a hand on her chest because she knew something they didn't. She knew that a shooter who fires one round to announce himself and then vanishes is not a man who gets caught by a 4-man patrol going up the obvious approach. He's a man who wants you to send a 4-man patrol up the obvious approach. He's studying your reaction. He's counting your wind. The patrol found nothing. A single expended casing cold and a scrape in the dirt where a man had lain for a long time. That was all. They came back down and Rourke declared the threat neutralized, the shooter gone moved on, and the fire base exhaled. Ava didn't exhale. That night she found Ward in the dark by the ammo crates, and she said the thing that had been sitting in her chest all day. He didn't leave. They cleared the position. They cleared a position. His position. The one he wanted them to find so they'd tell Rourke he was gone. She looked out across the black valley toward the ridge she couldn't see. He was showing me his manners, Lieutenant. He fired one round at Delgado on the obvious approach in the obvious position, and then he moved. He's letting us relax. He's letting Rourke tell everyone the threat's over. And somewhere on that ridge, there's a second position, a real one. And he's lying in it right now, counting the same wind I'm counting. Ward felt the hair on his neck stand up. How do you know he thinks like that? And here it came, the thing that had been buried the deepest. Because it's how I think, Ava said. Because it's how I was trained to think. Because that's what I would do. Her voice was very quiet. You want to know what scares me, Lieutenant? It's not that there's a sniper on that ridge. It's that he's good. He does the small, careful things. The one round to test the reaction. The stage position. The patience. I've been across a valley from men like that before. And the only way you beat a man like that is you outpatient him. You outcount him. You make one perfect shot before he makes his. And I can't take the shot because I'm the doc. She laughed, and there was no humor in it at all. I'm the most qualified person on this mountain to answer that man, and I'm the one person guaranteed not to be allowed to. Ward was silent for a long moment. Then how good are you, Ava, really? No modesty. I need to know what we're actually working with here. Ava looked at him in the dark. In the program I'm not allowed to talk about, she said there was a shot, a real one, longer than this, worse wind, a target that had 4 seconds to live and didn't know it. I made it. And then I made 2 more that day, and I saved the men I was covering, and the after action said it was one of the finest pieces of shooting anyone in the program had ever seen. She looked away. And 3 weeks later, they buried the whole thing because the operation shouldn't have happened, and I got told the finest thing I ever did with my hands was something I could never do again and never tell anyone I'd done. So yes, Lieutenant, I'm good. I'm as good as anyone on this continent, and it's the loneliest thing I own. Ward didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. But something shifted in him that night, some final piece clicking into place, and from that moment forward, he stopped thinking of her as a mystery he was solving and started thinking of her as a weapon. The whole fire base was sitting on top of, without knowing it. Day 26, the second sign came, and Ava was the only one who read it right. A resupply convoy was inbound on the Valley Road, and the enemy hit its lead vehicle with a pressure plate, i.e. a full 6 kilometers short of ridge pointed. No casualties, vehicle recoverable, and Rourke wrote it off as bad luck on a bad road. But Ava, listening to the radio traffic while she restocked the aid bag, went very still. That's the road we'd use to reinforce, she said to Ward later, or to medevac, or to bring up a real sniper team if we ever admitted we needed one. So he's not just watching our firebase anymore. He's shaping the ground around it. He blew the road that brings help in. He's isolating us. She counted it off on her fingers, and her voice had the flat certainty that Ward had learned to trust more than anything Rourke ever said with all his medals. The single round to test our reaction. The stage position so we'd relax. Now the road to make sure that when the real thing happens, we're alone. Lieutenant, this isn't one shooter with a grudge. This is a plan. Somebody smart is building toward a day, and on that day, this firebase is going to be committed to something else cut off from help. And that man on the ridge is going to open a door for a whole lot of people to come through. Ward's mouth went dry. You think it's an ambush, a big one, and the sniper's the opening move. I think the sniper's the whole hinge of it, Ava said. Take out our comms, take out our leadership, pin us down from the high ground while the assault comes up the draw. That's how you take a firebase. And it starts with one man on that spur who's better than anyone here is ready for. Then we tell Rourke. We've told Rourke. Twice. I'm a goat and I got lucky. She shook her head. He won't hear it from me. He can't. Because hearing it from me means admitting he was wrong about me 39 days ago, and that man would rather lose the firebase than lose that. It was the cruelest and truest thing she'd said, and Ward knew it was true, and the knowing sat in his stomach like a stone. Day 24 he tried anyway. He went to Rourke as the assistant patrol officer with his own name on the concern, careful to keep Ava's out of it entirely. He laid out the pattern, the test round, the stage position, the road, the isolation. He made it his own analysis, an officer's analysis, and for about 90 seconds he thought it was working because Rourke actually listened. Then Rourke said, "Where'd you get all this?" And Ward, who was a good officer and a bad liar, hesitated for exactly 1 beat too long. Rourke's eyes narrowed. "This is the doc. This is her theory coming out of your mouth." He stood up slowly. You've been talking to her. Senior Chief, the analysis stands on its own. The analysis is a courseman's fantasy that you've been dumb enough to swallow. Rourke came around the desk. I don't know what she's got on you, Lieutenant, whether she's whispering in your ear or you got a little crush on the mysterious doc, but I'm going to say this once. That woman is a medic. She is not a tactician. She is not a scout. She is not a threat analyst. And if you keep parroting her paranoia to me, I will note in your file that you allowed a subordinate to compromise your judgment. Do you understand what that does to a young officer's career? Ward stood very straight. I understand, Senior Chief. Good. Now go do your actual job and stay away from the aid station unless you're bleeding. Ward walked out with his career intact and his stomach in knots, and he found Ava at the Wadi and told her, and she nodded like she'd known exactly how it would go because she had. I'm sorry, he said. I tried. I know you did. Don't try again. You've got more to lose than I do. She looked at him. How many days have you been helping me now? Lieutenant, I don't know. 2 weeks. 14 days. She almost smiled. You've counted the wind at the fuel point every morning for 14 days and you don't even know you're doing my job. You range better than half his operators now. You just don't know it. Ward blinked. Baba, you know. I do. You do. And for the first time, she said it out loud, the thing she'd been building toward, without telling him. Because I've been training you, Lieutenant. Slow, quiet, in pieces you didn't notice. Because I can build the finest firing solution in the world, and it doesn't matter if I can't take the shot. And there's exactly one scenario where I get to take the shot, and it's a scenario so bad that if it comes, I'm going to need a spotter. And you're the only person on this mountain who's going to be able to read me a wind call under fire. Ward stared at her. The weight of it landed all at once. You've been getting me ready. I've been getting us ready. She picked up her bag. Because being right isn't going to be enough, Lieutenant. When it comes, being right is going to happen at the exact moment everyone's too busy dying to care whether the doc had a theory. And in that moment, if we haven't already built the thing, there won't be time to build it. So we build it now, in secret, every day, and we pray we're wrong. Day 20, they nearly got caught. Ava had risked bringing the wind meter and the rangefinder together to a hide she'd found behind the generators, a spot with a clean sight line to the tooth that nobody used because it was loud and it stank of diesel. She was on her belly actually building the shot for real, calling the numbers to Ward, watching the far ridge through the day optic she'd borrowed from the locked cage, using a key she absolutely was not supposed to have, when Delgado came around the corner, looking for a wrench. He stopped dead. He looked at the doc lying prone behind the generators with an optic to her eye, and the lieutenant crouched beside her with a notebook. He looked at it for a long, long second. Ava didn't move, didn't lower the optic, just said in a voice as flat as the horizon, "You saw a shooter on that ridge take a shot at your head 6 days ago, Delgado." "Yeah." "You want to live through the next one?" Delgado swallowed. "Yeah." "Then you didn't see anything back here. And when it happens, you do exactly what I tell you when I tell you no matter who's yelling what. Can you do that?" There was a long pause. And then Delgado, who 9 days ago had called her the doc, like a punchline, said quietly, "What do you need me to do?" And that was the first one. The first man at Firebase Ridgepoint to choose her over Rourke before the day came on faith alone. It would not be the last. Day 18, the circle grew to 3, then 4. Delgado brought in the armor, a quiet kid named Foss, because Ava needed someone who could get her hands on that MK-11 in the 2 minutes she'd have when the world came apart. And Foss, who'd watched the doc, said his own broken finger, with hands steadier than any surgeon's, agreed to look the other way at the exact right moment. Then Bishop, whose wrist she'd taped, who'd said, "Earn your keep," like she was the help. Bishop came in because Delgado told him one sentence that Ava never heard, but could guess she knew about the ridge before any of us, and Rourke buried it. They didn't have a plan so much as they had an understanding. A handful of men who had quietly decided that if the day Ava kept talking about ever came, they were going to do what the doc said and not what the senior chief said, and God help them all. Ward found this terrifying. "You're building a mutiny," he told her one night. "I'm building a chance," she said. "There's a difference, and on the day you'll see it. If nothing happens, it's 4 guys who trust the medic a little more than they used to. If it happens, it's 4 guys who move half a second faster because they already believe. Half a second, Lieutenant. That's the whole war. That's the entire margin." Day 15, she finished the solution. She didn't announce it. She just closed the green notebook one night, sat back on the crate, and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 11 months. It's done, she said. Ward looked up. The shot, the whole thing, every wind band, every thermal window by the hour. Elevation drift lead if he's moving the works. If that man fires from the spur or the reverse slope or the third position, think he's got. That nobody's found I can put a round on him inside 4 seconds of getting behind that rifle. She held up the notebook. This is the most complete firing solution I've ever built in my life. Longer than the shot I made in the country I can't name. And I built it for a rifle I've never fired from positions I've never shot from on a target. I've never seen in a war where I'm not allowed to pull a trigger. She laughed softly. It might be the best work of my career, and it lives in a notebook a corpsman keeps in her cargo pocket, and if I'm lucky, nobody will ever know it existed. And if you're not lucky, her smile faded. If I'm not lucky, everybody's going to know, and it's going to be the worst day this firebase has ever seen. Day 12, the twist came that she hadn't counted on, and for the first time in the whole 41 days, Ava Mitchell was wrong about something. She'd assumed the entire time that the danger was one man. One patient sniper on the ridge, the hinge of an eventual ambush. But that afternoon, a comms tech ran a routine sweep and found something that made the hair stand up on the back of every neck at Ridge Point. Someone was ranging their radio traffic. Not jamming it, not yet, just quietly cataloging it, mapping which frequencies the firebase used and when. The exact kind of patient intelligence work a professional does in the days before he takes a whole network down at once. And that meant the sniper on the ridge wasn't a lone operator. He had support. He had a signals element. He had a team. Ava heard about it and went cold in a way Ward had never seen. What? He said. What is it? I built the shot for one man, she said quietly. One shooter, one target, one perfect answer. But he's not alone. He's got comms guys, which means he's got a command element, which means when it happens, it's not going to be one sniper in an assault force. It's going to be coordinated, timed. Somebody's going to be talking to that shooter, feeding him targets, telling him who to take first. She pressed her palm flat against the notebook. I've been preparing to answer one man. I need to be preparing to answer a machine. And the shot doesn't change, but the pressure does. Because now when I get behind that rifle, there's not going to be time for 4 seconds. There's going to be time for one. Whoever's running that team is going to see a round come off this firebase, and he's going to understand instantly that we've got something we're not supposed to have, and he's going to turn everything he owns onto my position. Ward's voice was quiet, so the first shot has to count. The first shot has to end it, Ava said. Not slow him down, end him, because I won't get a second one before they bury me in fire. She looked up. 12 days, Lieutenant. 12 days until what? I don't know, that's the part I can't count. But it's close now. Everything he's doing, the road, the comms, mapping the stage withdrawal, it's a man finishing his preparations. He's almost ready, and when he's ready, he won't wait. She closed the notebook. We're out of time to get more ready. From here on, we just stay sharp and we don't let Rourke send anybody up that ridge again to get killed, proving I was right. Day 9, Rourke almost got them all killed early. He'd gotten a burr under his saddle about the eastern ridge, an operator's pride that wouldn't let a shooter sit up there rent-free, and he ordered a full squad patrol to sweep the whole spur at first light. Ava heard about it the night before and did the only thing she could do, which was the most dangerous thing she'd done in 11 months. She went to Rourke directly. She knocked on the command tent post at 2200, and he looked up from his maps with open contempt. The aid station on Fire Dock. Don't send that patrol up the ridge tomorrow, Senior Chief. His face went hard. Excuse me. There's a signals element working with the shooter. Your comms tech found it 2 days ago. That means the ridge is being watched by more than one set of eyes, and a full squad going up the obvious ground at first light is exactly what they're waiting for. You'll walk 12 men into a kill zone. She kept her voice level, respectful. Everything her training had taught her about how to talk to a man who could not stand to be taught. I'm not asking you to believe my theory. I'm asking you to look at your own comms tech's report and not send a squad up a mountain that's being actively surveilled. For a moment, just a moment, she saw it work. She saw the operator in him, the 22 years of keeping men alive in him actually weigh it. And if he'd been anyone else, if the information had come from anyone else, he might have canceled the patrol. But it came from her, and that was the one thing he couldn't get past. "Get out of my tent," he said. "Senior Chief, you've been in the ear of my patrol officer, you've got my operators whispering behind my back, and now you're walking into my command tent to cancel my patrols. You know what that is, Doc? That's the beginning of me losing command of my own fire base to a corpsman with delusions." He stood. "The patrol goes at first light, and when it comes back with nothing because there's nothing up there but a scared man who ran days ago, you and I are going to have a very different conversation about your future on this mountain." Ava stood there one more second. Then she said the only thing she had left. "Then send them up the reverse slope, not the spur, if you're going anyway. The reverse slope has dead ground the shooter can't see. The spur is open the whole way. Please, Senior Chief, if you do nothing else, I ask, do that. Send them up the back." And something in the way she said it, the specificity, the sheer flat certainty of a person describing ground she'd never walked as if she'd lived on it, got through just enough. Rourke didn't say yes. He didn't say anything. But at first light, the patrol went up the reverse slope. And halfway up, a single round cracked across the valley and blew a canteen off Bishop's kit from the direction of the spur, and every man on that patrol threw himself into the dead ground on the reverse slope that Ava Mitchell had told them was there, and every one of them came home alive. Rourke never acknowledged it, but Bishop did. Bishop came to the aid station that afternoon, set the punctured canteen on Ava's table without a word, and looked at her for a long moment. "You've never been up that ridge," he said. Once, I checked." "You've never left the firebase perimeter in 11 months. "No," Ava said, "I haven't." "Then how do you know it's got dead ground on the back slope that just saved my life?" Ava looked at the canteen, the neat hole punched through it that would have been through Bishop's spine if he'd been on the open spur. "Because I've spent 41 days, she said quietly, "learning that mountain better than the man who's living on it. It's the only thing I've been able to do, Mom. I couldn't warn you with rank. I couldn't warn you with a rifle, so I warned you with the only thing they let me keep." She pushed the canteen back toward him. "Keep it. Put a plug in it. It'll remind you to move fast when I tell you to on the day it's not a canteen." Bishop picked up the canteen. At the flap, he stopped. "How many days, Doc?" She looked up, surprised. Delgado had told them then. They were all counting now, the little circle of them, counting down to a number none of them could see. 9, she said, "give or take." Bishop nodded slowly and left, and Ava sat alone in the aid station with the war getting closer by the hour. Day 6, ward broke. It happened at night the way these things do in the medical tent, with the flap tied shut. He'd been carrying the secret for over a month, watching Rourke bury every warning, watching the noose tighten around a firebase full of men who had no idea, and it had finally gotten too heavy. "We should go over his head," Ward said. "Radio the battalion. Report Rourke's negligence directly. Get somebody with rank up here to override him before it's too late." "And say what?" Ava asked gently. "That the corpsman has a theory that the assistant patrol officer believes the corpsman lieutenant, they'll do exactly what Rourke did. They'll trust the senior chief with 22 years and a chest full of medals over a medic and a lieutenant. And then Rourke will know we went over his head and he'll fly me off this mountain, and then when it happens, there won't be anyone here who can take the shot. You'd have won the argument and lost the war. So we just wait. We just sit here and let it come. We wait ready." Her voice was steady, and it steadied him the way it had steadied a wounded private without her ever raising it. "That's the whole hard discipline of it, Lieutenant. You can be completely right and completely alone and completely unable to stop the thing you see coming. And the only power you have is to be so ready that when the moment finally arrives, being right becomes the only thing left standing between everyone and the ground." She reached out and for the first time put her hand on his arm. "I've lived in this exact place before, knowing something no one will believe. It nearly broke me the last time. But I learned that the answer isn't to make them believe you. The answer is to be so prepared that when they finally see it, you're already moving." Ward looked at her hand on his arm. "How do you carry it, being right this long alone with nobody believing you?" "You count the wind," Ava said, "1 hour at a time, and you don't think about the number." Day 3, the whole valley went quiet. The enemy stopped everything. No more test rounds, no more comms mapping, No more IEDs on the road. The signals element that had been cataloging their traffic went completely dark. And where Rourke read this as proof that the threat had finally moved on, that the doc's paranoia had been exactly that, Ava read it as the single most frightening thing that had happened in 41 days. He's finished. She told the little circle of them gathered in the diesel-stinking hide behind the generators at 0200 Ward, and Delgado and Bishop and Foss all crouched in the dark around her. The reason it's quiet is that he's done preparing. There's nothing left for him to learn about us. He knows our frequencies, our patrol patterns, our reaction times, our reinforcement route, everything. The silence isn't him leaving, it's him loading. She looked at each of their faces in the dark. When it comes all at once. Comms first so we can't call for help. Then the sniper to take our leadership and pin us. Then the assault up the draw. It'll happen fast in daylight, probably during a patrol, when half our strength is outside the wire and can't get back in. She held up the green notebook. When it starts, you won't have time to think. So think now. Foss, the second the shooting starts. That MK-11 comes out of the cage, and it comes to wherever I am. Don't ask. Don't clear it with anybody. Don't wait for Rourke. Delgado, Bishop, when I move to a firing position, you cover my back, and you keep the doc's bag close because I'm still the only medic on this rock, and men are going to be bleeding. Ward. She looked at him last. You're my spotter. You've counted this win for 41 days. When I get behind that rifle, you're going to be the calmest voice in the loudest moment of your life, and you're going to read me the valley like you've been doing it your whole life, because you have. You just didn't know it. They were all silent. The generators hummed, and Bishop said the thing they were all thinking. Rourke's going to lose his mind, a corpsman on the long gun. He'd rather die. He might, Ava said quietly. That's the part I can't solve. On the day there's going to be a moment where the whole thing hangs on whether Daniel Rourke can let a woman he's spent 11 months humiliating pick up a rifle and save his life. And I don't know which way that man breaks. She closed the notebook. But I know this. When that moment comes, I'm not going to ask him. I'm done asking him. I asked him 41 days ago, and he called me a goat. When it comes, I'm going to take the rifle, and he can write me up from a grave or thank me from a stretcher. But he is not going to stop me. Because there are going to be men bleeding out in that valley, and I am the only person on this mountain who can close that door on the ridge, and I have spent every single day since he laughed at me getting ready to do it. She looked around the circle one last time. 3 days, gentlemen. Maybe less. Stay sharp. Stay close. And when it starts, move it like you already believe me, because that half second is the whole war. They melted back into the dark one by one, and Ava stayed behind the generators alone, and she opened the green notebook to the last page one more time, and by the red light of her headlamp, she read the numbers she'd built over 41 days. The range, the wind, the thermals, the elevation, the whole architecture of a shot she prayed she'd never take. Then she zipped the notebook into her cargo pocket, and she logged the wind at 0200, and she lay down in her cot in the aid station fully dressed with her boots on the way she'd slept. Slept for the last week, and she stared at the canvas over her head, and she counted not the days now because the days were almost gone, but the wind 1 hour at a time, the way she'd taught herself to carry the unbearable weight of being right too soon. And 840 meters away, in the dark, on ground he'd chosen and studied and prepared for weeks, a patient man finished loading and settled in and counted the same wind and waited for the morning. It came on the morning of the third day, exactly the way she'd said it would. 0600 Ava logged the wind. Northeast 2 knots gusting 3, dying to nothing by the tree line. She wrote it in the green notebook with a hand that did not shake, and she felt the number under her ribs the way you feel a storm before the first drop, and she knew. She didn't know how she knew. She just knew the way she'd known about the sterile morning 39 days ago, the way she'd known about the dead ground on the reverse slope. Today. It was today. At 0640, Rourke sent out the morning patrol. 16 men, half the firebase's effective strength moving down into the valley on the routine loop that Ava had watched him run 100 times the loop she'd told the circle he would run on the day the loop that put a third of Ridgepoint's rifles outside the wire and strung out along the valley floor where they could be cut off in a heartbeat. She stood at the aid station flap and watched them go ward among them because Rourke had made a point of it, sending the assistant patrol officer out with the patrol specifically to get him away from the dock. And Ava's stomach dropped because her spotter was now a kilometer from the rifle she'd built him to serve. "Ward's outside the wire," she said to Delgado low and fast. Delgado followed her eyes. "Rourke did that on purpose." "I know he did." She was already recalculating, already tearing up part of the plan in her head, because a spotter a kilometer away could still talk on a radio, but a spotter a kilometer away could also be dead in the first 10 seconds. "Get Bishop. Get Foss to the cage. Now, quiet. Don't run, don't draw eyes. Just be where you're supposed to be." "You think it's today?" "I know it's today." Delgado didn't argue. 41 days ago, he'd called her the doc like a punchline. Now he looked at her face for 1/2 second, and then he moved. At 0658, the radios died. Not gradually. All at once. Every net at Ridgepoint went to hard static in the same instant, the signals element that had gone dark 3 days ago, coming alive with everything it had been saving. And Ava heard the comms tech shout something and Rourke's voice bark a question, and she was already moving, because she'd told them this exact thing in the dark behind the generator's comms first, so we can't call for help. "They're jamming us," the comms tech yelled. "Full spectrum. I can't raise the patrol. I can't raise battalion. I've got nothing." And the patrol was in the valley. 16 men, Ward among them, cut off from the firebase in the same second the enemy chose. Then the world came apart. At 0700 exactly, the valley floor erupted. A machine gun opened up. From the northern draw, a heavy one, the deep hammering of a belt-fed weapon that Ava felt in her chest from 400 meters, and it caught the patrol in the open and drove them into whatever cover the valley floor offered, which was almost none. In the space of 3 seconds, the routine morning became 16 men fighting for their lives in the low ground, and Ridgepoint above them, with its radios dead. Unable to talk to them, unable to coordinate exactly as she'd said. "Contact!" someone screamed from the wire. "Contact in the valley the patrol's pinned. They're pinned in the open." Ava was already at the western berm with the medical bag, but her eyes weren't on the valley floor. Her eyes were on the eastern ridge, on the tooth, on the broken spur 840 meters away, because she knew that the machine gun was the noise the machine gun was meant to fix everyone's attention on the valley floor, and the real killer was going to speak from the high ground the moment the firebase committed to helping the patrol. She was right. At 0740 seconds, the sniper on the ridge took his first shot, and it was not a test round. The comms tech standing exposed on the command tent's radio platform, trying to punch a signal through the jamming, dropped without a sound. One moment he was there, the next he was down, and the crack of the shot rolled across the valley a full second later, and Ava's blood went cold because she knew that shot. She'd built the answer to that shot. 840 meters off the spur into the one man at Ridgepoint, whose job was to call for help. Sniper Bishop was screaming. "Sniper on the ridge, he got the comms tech. Everybody down, everybody down." Rourke came out of the command tent at a dead run, and for one moment Ava saw the operator. He actually was the 22 years of it because he took in the whole picture in a single sweep. The pinned patrol, the dead comms tech, the machine gun in the draw, the sniper on the ridge. And she watched him understand all at once that everything the doc had said for 41 days was happening in front of him in real time. She watched it land on his face, and she watched him refuse it anyway. "Get me comms," he roared. "Somebody get me a working radio. I need to talk to that patrol." "There's no comms, Senior Chief. They've got us fully jammed." "Then we go get them. Second squad on me. We're going down to..." "Senior Chief, don't." Ava's voice cut across the chaos, and it was not loud, but it was so flat and so certain that Rourke actually stopped. "If you send a squad down that slope right now, the sniper on the ridge kills them one at a time on the open ground. That's the whole trap. The machine gun pins the patrol, you send help, the sniper harvests the help. You have to take the ridge first. You have to close that high position before anyone crosses open ground." For one heartbeat, one single heartbeat, Rourke looked at her and she saw him almost listen. She saw the door start to open. Then the sniper fired again, and Petty Officer Delgado, 10 feet from Ava, spun and went down with a round through the shoulder, and the door in Rourke's face slammed shut on his fury. "Get her off my berm," Rourke bellowed. "The doc does not run my defense second squad. We are going down to that patrol. Move, move." Ava was already on Delgado hands inside his kit, finding the wound, and it was through and high, and he'd live if she packed it now, and she packed it now fast, her hands doing the medic's work while her mind screamed the sniper's math. And over Delgado's grunt of pain, she said the only thing she had left to say to Rourke. He's going to kill your squad on the slope, Senior Chief. Every man you send down there dies until that ridge is closed. You know I'm right. You've known for 41 days. And Rourke, standing over her, looked down at the doc, kneeling in his subordinate's blood, and his face was a war between the operator, who knew she was right, and the man who could not survive her being right, and in the end, the man won the way he always had. We move on 3, he told his squad, not looking at her. 1, advice. 2, the machine gun in the draw shifted its fire, and the sniper on the ridge fired a third time. And the round meant for Rourke's center mass caught him instead in the hip as he turned, spun him half around and dropped the senior chief of Firebase Ridge Point onto the dirt of his own berm with a wound that took his leg out from under him and his command with it. For 1 second, there was nothing but the machine gun and the screaming. Rourke was down. The comms tech was dead. Delgado was hit. The patrol was pinned and cut off in the valley with Ward somewhere in the middle of it. And the sniper on the ridge, the patient man who had counted his win for weeks, had just done exactly what Ava said he would do, decapitated the firebase in the first 90 seconds, and opened the door for whatever was coming up the draw behind that machine gun. And into that second of nothing, Ava Mitchell stood up. She left Delgado packed and stable, and she stood up on the berm in full view of the ridge, and she turned to Boissez, who was frozen 20 feet away by the weapons cage, and she said the sentence she'd built 41 days to earn the right to say, Foss, the MK-11, now. Foss looked at Rourke bleeding on the dirt. He looked at Ava standing exposed on the berm with a sniper on the ridge. And then, God bless him, he did what the doc said and not what the senior chief had ever ordered, and he ran for the cage. Belay that, Rourke's voice was a raw thing torn out of a man bleeding from the hip, but it still carried 22 years of command in it. Foss, you do not touch that weapon. That is an order. The doc does not. Send the doc. The words came from the valley floor, from the radio net that flickered to life for 1 broken half second as the jamming stuttered, and it was Ward's voice, Ward pinned in the open with 15 men, Ward who had counted the win for 41 days and knew exactly what was standing on that berm, screaming it up the mountain with everything he had left. Send the doc, Rourke, do you hear me? Send the doc. She's the only one who can reach that ridge. Send the doc. And every man on that berm who'd been in the circle, Bishop and the wounded Delgado and Foss with his hand already on the cage, and every man who hadn't, the young privates and the second squad frozen mid-move, all of them heard a wounded SEAL in the valley scream for the medic to pick up a rifle, and something broke open in the middle of Firebase Ridge Point that could never be closed again. Rourke on the ground looked up at Ava, and it was the moment she'd told the circle she couldn't solve. The whole war hanging on whether Daniel Rourke could let the woman he'd humiliated for 11 months pick up a rifle and save his men. You're a medic, he said, and there was blood in his mouth now, and something that was almost pleading under the fury. You're a medic, Doc. You can't. I know what I am, Senior Chief, Ava said, and she took the MK-11 out of Foss's hands as he reached her, and she checked the chamber in one motion that told every operator watching that this was not the first long gun she'd ever held, not the 100th, and the whole berm went still around that single competent motion. I've always known what I am. You're the one who didn't. Then she was moving. 0704 minutes. She moved to the high firing position she'd pre-calculated 41 days before the battle began. The one behind the northern gun emplacement, with the sandbag rest at exactly the right height, and the clean line to the spur, the position she'd measured and ranged and memorized in secret because she'd known this exact morning was coming. And she dropped behind the sandbags and settled the MK-11 onto the rest, and the whole architecture of 41 days of preparation collapsed into a single simple thing, which was a woman, a rifle, and a valley she knew better than she knew her own hands. Bishop, she said, and her voice had changed, gone flat and slow, and terrifyingly calm, the voice from the country she never named. Get on my radio. Relay to Ward. I need a wind call, and I need it now. Bishop grabbed the handset. The jamming stuttered and broke and held for a precious few seconds. Ward, the doc's up. She's on the gun. She needs wind. And Ward's voice came back from the valley floor, from behind whatever rock was keeping him alive. And it was the calmest voice in the loudest moment of his life, exactly as she'd built him to be. Tell her mid-valley thermals early, it's already lifting. She'll get climb through the middle third. Near winds 2 knots left to right. Far wind off the spurs swirling, call it 3/4. Tell her. A pause and then softer, meant only for her, even shouted across a kilometer of gunfire. Tell her I've got the wind. I've had it for 41 days. She just has to shoot. Ava heard it relayed and she closed her eyes for 1/2 second and she saw the whole valley in the green notebook of her mind, the thermal lifting early off the southern slope. Just like the new pattern said it would. The near wind pushing left, the swirl off the broken spur, and she made every correction at once, the way she'd made 10,000 of them in a life she wasn't allowed to talk about. Then she opened her eyes and put them behind the optic, and she found the tooth. And he was there. 840 meters away on the reverse slope of the spur, exactly where she'd told the circle there was a third position that nobody had found, a shape that was almost not a shape. A patient man behind a long gun who had just decapitated a firebase and was tracking now down toward the valley floor, toward the pinned patrol, toward Ward, looking for his next target with the calm of a man who had done this many times before. He didn't know she was there. He didn't know that a corpsman with a notebook had spent 41 days building the precise answer to the precise shot he was about to take. He was good, the best she'd ever ranged, patient and careful and methodical. But he had counted the old wind. That was the thing Ava understood in the half second she settled the crosshair. He'd set up weeks ago in the still morning pattern, and he'd built his solution for the thermals that used to lift at 0900. But she'd caught the pattern change on day 39. She'd rebuilt everything with Ward at the fuel point, and that patient, careful, brilliant man on the ridge was about to fire down into the valley with a solution that was 41 days out of date, and he was going to shoot a hair low because the thermal was lifting earlier than his numbers knew. And he didn't know it, and she did. She had outcounted him. That was the whole war. That was the entire margin. Wounded RPG team southern approach, Bishop screamed suddenly. They're bringing up rockets on the assault dock. They're gonna hit the berm. Not yet, Ava said, and she did not move the crosshair off the ridge, because she knew with the cold certainty of the train that if she took her eye off the sniper to worry about the RPG, the sniper would kill Ward in the next 3 seconds. And if she killed the sniper first, the RPG team would still be there to deal with. But Ward would be alive to help her deal with it. Priorities. The whole job was priorities under fire. The ridge first. Always the ridge first. She let out half a breath. Her heart slowed. The world went quiet inside her the way it always did when everyone else's world got loud. And at 0705 minutes, Sergeant Ava Mitchell, the woman they never saw, the dock bandage duty, only took the first shot of Firebase Ridge Point's worst morning. The MK-11 bucked it against her shoulder. The round left the barrel and crossed 840 meters of valley air in a little over a second, riding the early thermal she'd corrected for, and the patient sniper hadn't. And it arrived on the reverse slope of the tooth exactly where 41 days of preparation said it would. And the machine gun in the northern draw, which had been hammering the patrol for 5 straight minutes, suddenly had no one calling its targets because the man who'd been coordinating the whole assault from the high ground was gone. Ava didn't celebrate. She didn't even breathe out all the way. She was already working the bolt, already scanning, already hunting the next problem. Because one shot didn't end a battle. One shot just changed its character, and the RPG team was still coming, and the machine gun was still firing, and there were 16 men in the valley who were still pinned. But something had shifted. Everyone felt it. The enemy fire in the valley faltered, stuttered, lost its rhythm, because the hand that had been conducting it was gone, and into that stutter, Ward's voice came up the broken radio net. The guns confused. They lost their eyes on the high ground. The doc took the sniper. She took him. Patrol's gonna move. We're gonna move. Ward, stay down. There's an RPG team south. I've got them. Do not move until I clear the RPG. Ava was already swinging the rifle, already finding the southern approach, already reading the swirl of wind on a completely different line. And this was the part no one understood about the job, that it was never one shot. It was 100 decisions a second, and every one of them was somebody's life. She found the RPG team, 2 men 300 meters closer than the ridge, coming up the southern draw with a launcher, and it was an easier shot in range and a harder shot in wind because the southern draw funneled the breeze into a mess, And she read it and corrected and fired, and the lead man dropped, and the second man dove for cover, and the launcher clattered onto the rocks unfired. RPG's down, Bishop was screaming half in disbelief. The RPG team's down, she got him. She got them both. One, Ava corrected flatly, working the bolt. Second man's in the rocks. Watch the southern draw. He'll try to recover that launcher. She never stopped scanning. Bishop, how's Delgado? Bishop looked startled to be asked in the middle of it. He's okay, Doc. He's holding pressure. He's talking, good, Rourke. And there was a pause because everyone had almost forgotten the senior chief bleeding on the berm, watching the woman he'd called bandage duty run the entire defense of his firebase from behind a rifle he'd forbidden her to touch. Rourke was watching her. He'd dragged himself up against the sandbags with his ruined hip, and he was watching Ava Mitchell work the valley with a competence that was tearing something loose in 22 years of certainty. And when Ava said his name, flat in the middle of the fight, checking on her wounded like the medic, she also still was, something in his face came apart. I'm alive, Rourke said. His voice was raw. Doc, I'm alive. Then hold pressure on that hip senior chief because I'm a little busy to come pack it for you. And there was no cruelty in it, none. It was just the flat truth of a woman doing 4 jobs at once, and that was somehow the thing that broke Rourke worse than any accusation could have. She wasn't rubbing it in. She didn't have time to rub it in. She was too busy saving all of them. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning to turn. Because the enemy, assault robbed of its eyes on the high ground, robbed of its RPGs, still had that machine gun in the northern draw, and still had men coming up behind it, and now those men were committing, pushing up out of the draw toward the pinned patrol, trying to overrun the 16 Americans in the open before Ridgepoint could reorganize. And Ava couldn't reach them all. The machine gun was tucked into the draw at an angle the berm couldn't see, deflated, protected by the very terrain she knew so well, and she said so out loud fast because the whole circle was listening now, and she needed them to move. I can't reach the gun from here. It's in the dead ground of the draw. I don't have the angle. Her mind was already 3 moves ahead. Ward, can you hear me? The gun's in defilade from the firebase, but it's exposed to the valley floor from the west. You've got 15 men down there. If you can get 4 of them west along the wadi, they'll have a flanking angle on that gun that I don't have from up here. I'll cover your move. Every head that pops up on that ridge or that southern draw, I'll put it down. You just get west and take the gun. Can you do that? A pause. The jamming crackled. Then Ward's voice steadied a lieutenant who'd found himself in the worst morning of his life, being handed command of the counterattack by a corpsman on a berm and rising to it. We can do that. Bishop Delgado's squad element, you copy the doc's plan. Copy, Bishop said, and grabbed 2 privates in the firebase that had been leaderless and decapitated 90 seconds ago, began impossibly to fight back, because a woman on a berm was thinking clearly enough for all of them, and they had finally started to move, like they believed her. Ava settled back behind the rifle. Her job now was simpler and harder. Cover the flank. Keep every enemy head down while Ward's men move west along the wadi toward the machine gun, which meant reading 3 positions at once, the ridge, the southern draw, the mouth of the northern draw, and putting around on anything that threatened the men making the move and doing it faster than the enemy could adjust. She did it. God, she did it. A shape rose in the southern draw to fire on Ward's flanking element, and she put it down before it got the weapon up. A second man on the ridge, a spotter or a survivor from the sniper's element, lifted his head to range the wadi, and she took him too. A second impossible shot on the same brutal line, the swirl off the broken spur, and Rourke, watching from the sandbags, made a sound that wasn't quite a word, because he'd been in the teams for 22 years, and he had never not once seen shooting like this, and it was coming from the doc. Who taught you, he said. It wasn't really a question. It was a man's whole world reorganizing itself. Doc, who taught you to shoot like that? Ava worked the bolt, found the next threat. You wouldn't believe me if I told you, Senior Chief. She fired. You've never believed me yet. Ward's element reached the wadi bend. Ava saw them go, 4 men low and fast along the dead ground she'd mapped, and she covered every meter of it, and then Ward's voice came up the net tight with effort. We're set on the gun's west flank. We've got the angle going loud in 3. Go, Ava said. I've got everything behind you. Go. And Ward's 4 men opened up on the machine gun from the flank. It never expected from the western angle the terrain had hidden, and the gun that had pinned the patrol for 6 minutes went silent in a storm of flanking fire, and the deep hammering that had been the spine of the whole enemy assault simply stopped. The valley went quiet in pieces, the gun dead, the sniper dead, the RPGs dead, the assault robbed of every one of its coordinated parts by a woman who had spent 41 days building. The answer to each of them broke apart into individual men, making the individual decision to run, and they ran back down the draws they'd come up, leaving their dead. And the worst morning in the history of Firebase Ridgepoint began impossibly mercifully to end. Ava didn't lower the rifle, not yet. She held the ridge in her optic for a long 30 seconds, then a full minute, scanning for the shot that follows the false ending. The patient sniper's oldest trick, because she, of all people, knew that a battle isn't over when it feels over. It's over when the wind stops carrying the smell of it. She held and held, and the ridge stayed empty, and the draws stayed empty, and the valley below filled with the sound of American voices calling casualty counts to each other across the open ground. Only then did she come off the rifle. Only then did she breathe all the way out. And in the silence that came down over the valley, Sergeant Ava Mitchell knelt behind the northern gun emplacement with a smoking MK-11 across her knees, and she did not feel triumph, and she did not feel vindication, and she did not look at Rourke to see whether he finally understood. She felt the old cold thing settling back down inside her, the weight of having been right, and she reached into her cargo pocket and took out the small green notebook. And she opened it to the last page where 41 days of Win lived, and she looked at the numbers that had just saved 16 men, and then she closed it and zipped it away. Then she stood up and she left the rifle on the sandbags, and she picked up the medical bag that had never once left her side, and she walked toward Rourke bleeding on the berm, and toward Delgado holding his packed shoulder, and toward the wounded coming up out of the valley, because the shooting was done now, and that meant the doc's real work was just beginning, and there was not one single part of her that was going to stop to be thanked. The medical bag had never once left her side, and now it became the only thing in the world. 0711 minutes. The shooting was 4 minutes dead, and the valley was full of wounded men, and Ava Mitchell went to work the way she'd gone to work, on the rifle methodical, in total triaging the whole firebase in her head before her knees hit the dirt beside the first casualty. She had done this in the country she never named. She had done it under fire and after fire, and in the long, terrible quiet that comes when the shooting stops and the dying doesn't. She knew the order. She knew who could wait and who couldn't, and she read it off the wounded the way she read wind off a valley, fast and cold and never wrong. Rourke was bleeding worst, and Rourke could wait. That was the first decision she made, and she made it out loud because she needed the whole berm to understand that from this moment, the doc was running the casualty collection point, and there would be no arguing about it. Bishop, get me a head count, dead and wounded valley and firebase. I want numbers in 60 seconds. She was already moving past Rourke toward the mouth of the northern gun position. Foss, break out every trauma kit on this rock and stage them here. Delgado, you're walking wounded. You're now my hands, follow me and do exactly what I say. Doc, Rourke's voice from the sandbags, thick with blood and something that had never been in it before, which was need. Doc, I'm hit bad. You're hit in the hip. The round missed the artery. You're packed and you're conscious, and you're going to be alive in an hour, Ava said. Not slowing, not cruel, just triaging a man out loud the way she'd triage anyone. There's a man in the valley with a sucking chest wound who has about that same hour and won't survive it without me. You wait. That's not me getting even, Senior Chief. That's just the order. You taught your operators the order your whole career. You know I'm right. And Rourke, who had spent 11 months refusing to admit the doc was ever right about anything, lay back against the sandbags and shut his mouth, because she was right, because it was the order, because the woman he'd humiliated was applying to his own wound the exact professional detachment he'd have demanded from any corpsman worth the title, and there was nothing in it he could argue with. And that was the most humbling thing of all. 0713 minutes. Ava reached the edge of the berm and looked down into the valley for the first time, not through an optic, but through a medic's eyes, and she started calling it. Sucking chest wound, that's Corpsman Grant. He went out with the patrol. Her stomach dropped 1 degree because Lucas Grant was the firebase's other medic, the junior corpsman, a kid of 23 who deployed with more heart than experience, and he'd been down in the valley when it all came apart. Ward, do you copy? Where's Grant? Ward's voice came up hoarse now. the adrenaline draining out of it into something ragged. Grant's hit Doc chest. He's the worst of us. We're carrying him up, but it's slow. We're all half shot to pieces down here. Don't carry him fast. Carry him flat. Keep the wounded side down. Do not let him sit up. She was already moving down the slope toward them, bag in hand, Delgado limping behind her. I'm coming to you. Everybody else who can walk yourselves up to the berm. Foss has kits staged. Anybody who can't walk you, leave a man, and you mark them, and I'll come. Nobody bleeds out alone today, you hear me, nobody. She reached Grant 30 meters down the slope where 4 men were carrying him in a poncho, and she stopped them with a hand and dropped to her knees in the dirt and had his kit open before they'd finished lowering him. And there it was, the wound she'd called from the berm, a chest that whistled with every breath, air getting into the space around the lung, the kind of wound that kills a man slow while he's still talking to you. Lucas, look at me. Grant's eyes were glassy, but they found her. You're going to be okay. You know this one. You've patched this one on other people. Now I'm going to do it on you, and you're going to help me by breathing exactly as slow as I tell you. Can you do that? Doc, Grant whispered. I couldn't. There was so many of them. I couldn't get to everybody. You got to everybody you could reach. That's the whole job. Now breathe slow. And her hands were moving as she talked, sealing the wound, decompressing the pressure that was crushing his lung doing. In 90 seconds, the thing that would keep a 23-year-old kid alive long enough to see a surgeon and Grant's whistling breath eased, and the glassy panic in his eyes settled into something that could survive the trip up the hill. Move him, she said. Flat, slow, wounded side down, straight to the berm. Go. 718 minutes. She was climbing back up the slope with Delgado when Ward reached her on his feet, blood on him, that mostly wasn't his, and for 1 second the two of them just looked at each other in the middle of the worst morning of both their lives. 41 days of secrets in the diesel stinking dark behind the generators. 41 days of counting, wind at the fuel point so nobody would see. 41 days of being the only two people on the mountain who believed and being unable to stop the thing they saw coming. And now here they were on the far side of it, both alive, the patrol alive, the firebase alive, because they'd built the thing in secret when there was still time to build it. You took him, Ward said, the sniper. First shot. I called the wind and you took him first shot at 8:40. You called it perfect, Ava said. Early thermal. You saw the lift before I could confirm it. If you'd called the old wind, I'd have shot low and he'd have killed us both, figuring out why. She almost smiled, and there was 41 days in it. You were the best spotter I've ever worked with, the lieutenant, and you didn't even know what you were until this morning. Ward's throat worked. You knew the whole time. You were building me for this exact hour. I was building all of us for this hour. I just prayed we'd never need it. She put her hand on his shoulder, brief hard. Now stop being my spotter and start being an officer. I need every walking man carrying wounded. I need Foss running the kit line, and I need you to keep the perimeter watching those draws, because a smart enemy hits you again while you're busy with your casualties. They won't come back today. But make them watch anyway. Go. Ward went. He was a different man than the one who'd gone out on patrol 90 minutes ago, and everyone could see it, and it had happened in the space of a single morning the way it does. 724 minutes. Ava reached the berm and the casualty collection point she'd built with 3 sentences, and it was working. Men laid in order of how bad Kit staged the walking wounded, pressed into service, holding pressure, and cutting away Kit. And in the center of it, Ava Mitchell moved from man to man with the green notebook precision of someone who had done this in a war nobody would ever officially admit she'd fought. Delgado one-armed, his shoulder-packed, held IV bags. Bishop ran the head count and then ran messages because the radios were still down. Foss cut open trauma kits and laid out exactly what Ava called for a half second before she called for it, learning her rhythm the way Ward had learned it, the way people learn a person worth following. And then finally she came to Rourke. 731 minutes. He'd been lying against the sandbags for 20 minutes, watching the doc save his firebase. And he'd had 20 minutes to think about 41 days, and when Ava finally knelt beside him and cut his trousers back from the hip wound with the same steady hands that had killed 3 men across a valley, Daniel Rourke could not look at her. It missed the artery, she said, checking the packing Delgado had put on early. Whoever packed this did it right. You're going to keep the leg. You're going to walk with a limp for a while and then probably not at all. She worked as she talked, cleaning, repacking, starting a line. You got hit because you stood up to give an order that would have gotten your second squad killed on that slope. So the wound's ugly, but the reason for it wasn't. You were trying to help your men. You were just trying to help them the wrong way. Doc. He said it to the sky because he still couldn't look at her. I called you bandage duty, 11 months. I wouldn't let you touch a weapon. I sent patrols up that ridge you told me not to. I told my own officer you were a corpsman with a fantasy. His voice cracked, and this was a man who had not cracked in 22 years. You told me about that sniper on day one. You told me the range. You told me the position. You told me he had a team. You told me he'd cut the road and jam the comms and hit us when the patrol was out. Every single thing. And I called you a goat. Yes, Ava said. You did. She didn't soften it. She didn't have it in her to soften it, and she wouldn't have if she could. She just cinched the fresh packing and taped it and checked the line, doing the work, letting the truth sit in the air between them exactly as heavy as it actually was. Why data them? Oh, Rourke asked, and now he did look at her, and his face was a wreck, 22 years of certainty lying in pieces around him. Why does a corpsman know all that? Why do you shoot like that? Who are you, Doc? Because you are not a medic. A medic doesn't take a man off a reverse slope hide at 840 meters first round in a swirling crosswind. I've served with the best shooters this country has ever produced, and I have never seen that. So who are you? And Ava Mitchell knelt there in his blood with the whole firebase working around her because she'd told it how, and she made the second hardest decision of her morning, which was how much of the truth to give a broken man. I'm someone who was very good at something, she said quietly, that I was told I could never do again and never talk about. There was an operation. It doesn't have a name I'm allowed to say. It went bad in a way that got people killed, and the easiest way for the men above me to make it disappear was to make me disappear. So they buried the record, and they made me a medic, and they told me the best thing I could do for the dead was to never pick up a long gun again. She finished the tape. So I didn't. For a long time I didn't. I came here and I counted wind in a notebook and I let you call me bandage duty because being invisible was the deal I made to stay alive. And then one morning I found a shape on a ridge and I knew exactly what it was and exactly what it meant, and I tried to tell you the honest way. Twice, and you called me a goat. She met his eyes. So I stopped asking you. And I spent 41 days building the answer in secret, praying I'd never have to use it because the day I used it was going to be the worst day this firebase ever had. And it was. Look around you, Senior Chief. This is what being right too soon looks like. It doesn't look like victory. It looks like this. Rourke was silent for so long. Around them, the collection point hummed, and then he said the thing that cost him everything he'd ever believed about himself. I was wrong about you. Ava capped the syringe. She looked at him, and she gave him the only answer she had, the one she'd give again, at the end when it was all finally over, flat and quiet and without a single ounce of triumph in it. I know. That was all. I know. Not it's okay because it wasn't. Not thank you for saying so because she didn't need him to say it. Just I know because she had always known, and being told she was right by the man who'd been wrong was not a victory to her. It was just a fact, catching up to another fact, and she had a firebase full of wounded, and she did not have the time or the wish to make it more than it was. 740 minutes. The radios came back. The jamming lifted all at once, the way it had come down. The enemy signals element gone with the man on the ridge who'd coordinated it, and suddenly the nets were alive. And Ward was on the command frequency raising battalion, and the story of Firebase Ridge Point started in fragments to travel down the mountain to people who would spend the next year trying to understand it. Battalion Ridge Point, we were hit by a coordinated assault company. Plus, we have repelled, I say again, we have repelled, we need medevac for, Ward looked at Ava. 6 urgent, she said without looking up from the private whose legs she was splinting. Grant chest, he's first. Rourke hip. Delgado shoulder, he's stable, he can wait if he has to. 3 more from the patrol, and 9 walking wounded who can wait for the second bird. 6 urgent surgical, 1 priority, Grant flies first, or Grant doesn't make it. Ward relayed it clean in the machinery of rescue that the enemy had spent 41 days trying to isolate them from finally began to turn, and the first medevac bird lifted off from somewhere down the valley and started climbing toward the top of the world. 0752 minutes. And here came the twist that Ava, who had counted everything, had not counted on. Because when Ward finished the medevac request, Battalion came back with a question that changed the temperature on the whole berm. Ridgepoint Battalion understood 6 urgent. Be advised, we have been monitoring your situation and we need to know over your net in the clear who is currently in command of your position and who directed the defense that repelled a company plus assault with the losses you're reporting. Battalion Actual wants a name. The berm went quiet. Every man who could hear the net looked at Ava kneeling in the dirt over a wounded private and then looked at Rourke propped against the sandbags, the senior chief, the man whose name was supposed to go in that answer, the man who by every rule and every regulation was the commander of Firebase Ridgepoint. And Rourke looked at Ava. This was the moment. Everyone felt it. The whole 11 months and 41 days of it came down to the space of one radio transmission. Rourke could give his own name. He was the commander. It would be true on paper. No one down the mountain would ever know that the defense had been run by a corpsman he'd forbidden to touch a weapon, by a woman he'd called bandage duty, by a sniper the Army had officially erased. He could take it. It would even be understandable. In the way that these things are, that a senior chief with 22 years would let the record say what the record was supposed to say. Ava didn't look up from the private's leg. She didn't fight for it. She didn't say a word. Because she had never once done any of this to have her name go down a mountain, and she wasn't going to start now. And if Rourke took the credit, she would let him take it and keep working, because the work was the only thing that had ever mattered to her. And that in the end was what broke Daniel Rourke all the way open. He reached out and took the handset from Ward with his bloody hand, and he keyed it, and in a voice that 22 years of command could barely hold steady, he told the truth down the mountain to everyone who was listening. Battalion, this is Senior Chief Rourke, Ridgepoint Commander. Be advised, I was wounded early in the engagement and unable to command. The defense of this position, the elimination of the enemy sniper element at 840 meters, the destruction of an RPG team, the flanking of a heavy machine gun, and the coordination of casualty collection under fire were all directed by my battalion corpsman, Sergeant Ava Mitchell. His voice cracked and he pushed through it. Every man alive on this firebase, it is alive because of her. She told me this attack was coming 41 days ago and I did not listen. Put that in the record. Put all of it in the record. Battalion Actual wanted a name. The name is Mitchell. He let go of the key, and the net was silent for a long moment, the whole battalion staff down the mountain trying to process what they just heard. And on the berm at the top of the world, every man who'd spent 11 months calling her the doc like a punchline looked at Ava Mitchell with something that would never again be anything close to a punchline. Ava finished splinting the private's leg. She tied it off. And only then did she look up and her eyes found Rourke's, and for the first time in 11 months and 41 days, something passed between them that was not contempt on his side and endurance on hers. You didn't have to do that, she said. Yeah, Rourke said. I did. He was gray now, the blood loss catching up, but he held her eyes. You want to know the difference between you and me, Doc? You spent 41 days being right and never once needed anybody to know it. I spent 22 years needing everybody to know I was right, and it made me deaf. You told me the truth on day one, and I couldn't hear it because it came from the wrong person. He closed his eyes. The record's going to say what it should have said. That's the only thing I've got left to give you, so take it. 0801 minutes. The first bird came in. Ava ran the loading personally because loading a medevac wrong kills men who'd otherwise live. And she put Grant on first flat wounded side down the 23-year-old corpsman who tried to reach everybody. And she squeezed his hand once through the litter straps and told him he'd done fine. He'd done fine. And then she stepped back and let the bird take him down the mountain toward a surgeon who would finish what she'd started. Rourke went on the same bird. They lifted him past her on the litter, and he reached out and caught her sleeve with his bloody hand, and he didn't say I was wrong about you again, because he'd already said it, and she'd already answered it, and there was nothing left in that particular ledger. Instead, he said something else, the last thing he said to her on the mountain, and it was the thing that told her he'd actually understood. They shouldn't have buried you, Doc. Whatever happened over there, whatever the record says, they shouldn't have taken the rifle away from somebody who shoots like that. That was a crime they committed, not you. His grip tightened. You've been carrying it like it was your fault. It wasn't. Put that down too. And then the litter was past her and into the bird, and the bird was lifting, and Ava Mitchell stood on the berm in the rotor wash with her medical bag in her hand, and something loosened in her chest that had been clenched tight for a very long time, longer than 41 days, longer than 11 months, all the way back to a country she never named and a rifle they'd taken out of her hands. 0809 minutes. Ward found her standing at the edge of the berm, watching the bird shrink down the valley toward the world. You okay? He asked. I've still got 9 walking wounded and a second bird inbound, she said. I'll be okay when they're all off this rock. That's not what I asked. Ava was quiet for a moment. Then because it was Ward, because he'd counted the wind with her in the dark for 41 days, because he was the one person on the mountain who'd earned the whole truth she gave him, a piece of it she hadn't given anyone. I've spent 2 years believing that what happened over there was mine to carry, that the operation went bad because of something I did or didn't do, and that being buried was the punishment I earned, and that the best thing I could do with the rest of my life was disappear and hand out gauze and never touch a long gun again. She watched the bird vanish. And a dying senior chief I've hated for 11 months just told me to put it down. And the terrible thing, Lieutenant, is that I think he might be right. I think I've been serving a sentence nobody actually gave me. Her voice was very quiet. I made myself invisible because I thought I deserved it. And it turns out I was just hiding a thing this firebase needed the whole time. Ward didn't say anything for a moment. Then, the men know now, all of them, what you are, what you did. You understand that you can't be invisible here anymore. Not after this morning. Every man on this mountain watched the doc take a rifle she was forbidden to touch and save all their lives. I know, Ava said. So what happens now? And Ava Mitchell looked down the valley where the bird had gone, toward the surgeons and the battalion staff, and the record that was finally 41 days and 2 years too late, going to say the true thing, and she didn't answer him because the answer wasn't ready yet, and because the second bird was inbound, and because she still had 9 wounded men who needed the doc more than they needed her to have an answer. She picked up the bag. She turned back to the collection point. And she went back to work the way she always had, the way she always would. One wounded man at a time in the long quiet that comes after the shooting stops and the real work begins. The second bird took the last of the walking wounded down the mountain at 0940 minutes, and only then, with every casualty off the rock and stable, did Sergeant Ava Mitchell allow herself to notice that she was bleeding. She'd known in the distant way you know a thing you've decided not to have time for. Somewhere in the first minutes of the fight, when the RPG round had cratered short of the berm, a fragment had opened her thigh, a long, shallow tear that had soaked her trouser leg dark and stiff through 3 hours of triage. She'd felt it go in. She'd filed it under later, the way she'd filed the number under later for 41 days. And she'd knelt on it and worked on it and run a casualty collection point on it. And now the last bird was gone and there was no one left who needed the doc more than the doc did. And her body finally sent the bill. Doc. Ward saw her sway. He was beside her in 2 steps, catching her arm. Doc, you're hit. How long have you been hit? Since about 0701. Ava said and sat down against the sandbags before her legs made the decision for her. It's fine. It missed everything that matters. I've been standing on it. You've been standing on it for 3 hours. Ward was already cutting the trouser leg back, and Bishop was there with a kit, and Delgado limped over one-armed, and the 3 men who'd been in the circle in the diesel stinking dark now knelt around the woman who'd built them all for this morning, and the roles had flipped, and none of them liked it. It needs packing, and it needs a couple stitches, and it does not need any of you looking at me like that, Ava said. Bishop, give me the kit. I'll do it myself. No, Ward said. It was the first order he'd ever given her, and it landed strange on both of them. You've patched every man on this mountain today. You do not get to patch yourself too. Sit still and let somebody do it for you, for once. He looked at Delgado. You've watched her do this 40 times today. You're 1 hand short, but you've got eyes. Talk me through it. She supervises, she does not touch. And Ava Mitchell, who had not let another human being take care of her since a country she never named, sat against the sandbags with her hands open and empty in her lap, and let Caleb Ward pack and close the wound in her thigh while Delgado talked him through it. And it was clumsy, and it hurt, and it took twice as long as it should have. And it was the first time in 2 years that anyone had done anything for her at all. "You're doing it too tight," she said. "I know. You're going to leave a scar. You've got worse ones," Ward said, not looking up, and it was true, and they both knew it was true, and neither of them said anything else about it. 0958 minutes. Battalion called again, and this time it wasn't for a medevac count. It was for her. "Ridgepoint Battalion, is Sergeant Mitchell able to come to the net?" Ward handed her the handset. Ava keyed it. "Battalion Mitchell." The voice on the other end was older, calmer, a voice with stars somewhere near it. "Sergeant Mitchell, this is Battalion Actual. I've read Senior Chief Rourke's report. I've read the preliminary from the medevac crew and from Lieutenant Ward. I've been doing this a long time, Sergeant, and I want to ask you something directly, and I want a direct answer. The shooting you did this morning, the sniper at 841st round reverse slope in a crosswind, that is not corpsman shooting. That is not designated marksman shooting. That is work I have seen from exactly one kind of person in 30 years. A pause. "Sergeant, before you were a corpsman, what were you?" And there it was. The question the whole story had been climbing toward, coming down a mountain in a general's voice in the clear on a net full of people. 2 years after they'd buried the answer. Ava looked at Ward. She looked at Delgado and Bishop and Foss, the men who knew a piece of it now. She looked down the valley where the birds had gone, carrying men who were alive because of the things she'd spent 2 years being ashamed of. And she made the last hard decision of the longest morning of her life, which was to stop hiding. "Sir," she said, "I was a sniper in a program that officially doesn't exist, doing a job that officially wasn't happening in a place we officially weren't. There was an operation that went bad. People died. And the fastest way to make it disappear was to make me disappear, so they sealed the record and made me a medic and told me to never pick up a long gun again." Her voice was steady the way it always was, the way it had been through everything. "I've spent 2 years believing that was a punishment I earned. I found out this morning it was just a thing that was easier for other people than the truth. I'm a corpsman now, sir. I'm a good one. But you asked what I was, and what I was is the reason 16 men are alive on this mountain tonight." The net was quiet for a long moment. Then the general said something that Ava would carry the rest of her life. "Sergeant Mitchell, I don't know who buried you, and I intend to find out. But I want you to hear this from me in the clear in front of your firebase and your battalion. Whatever mistake got made 2 years ago, it wasn't yours to carry. And a country that takes the rifle out of the hands of somebody who shoots like you did this morning and hides her in a medical tent is a country that got something badly wrong. That's going to be looked at. That's a promise." A pause. "Get your legs seen to." "That's an order. Battalion out." Ava lowered the handset, and Ward, kneeling over her half-finished stitches, looked up at her with something shining in his eyes that he didn't bother to hide. 2 years, he said quietly. 2 years you've carried that. And it took a general 30 seconds to tell you to put it down. "It took a general 30 seconds, Ava said. "It took you 41 days. And it took Rourke a bullet in the hip." She almost smiled. "Turns out the hardest part wasn't the shot, Lieutenant. It was letting anybody see me take it." 1006 minutes. The last bird's rotor sound faded down the valley, and Firebase Ridgepoint, bloodied and holding, went quiet in a way it had never been quiet before. Because everything was different now, and everyone felt it. The men who'd survived moved around the berm with a new gravity, and every one of them, at some point in that long afternoon, found a reason to walk past the dock. Not to say anything. Most of them didn't have words for it. They just walked past and slowed and looked at her and moved on, and it was its own kind of apology. 11 months of the dock like a punchline being quietly set down and left behind by men who had watched the punchline save their lives. Delgado was the one who finally said it out loud that afternoon, sitting beside her with his arm in the sling she'd rigged. "I called you the doc," he said, "like it was nothing, like you were the help. And you knew the whole time. You knew about that ridge before any of us, and you knew what you could do, and you just took it. 11 months of us treating you like that, and you just took it." He shook his head slowly. Why'd you let us? You could have told us any day. You could have told Rourke to his face what you were. Why'd you let us think you were nothing?" And Ava gave him the truest answer she had, the one that held the whole shape of who she was. Because I didn't need you to know what I was, she said. I needed you to be alive. Those aren't the same thing, Delgado. Most people can't tell them apart. They spend their whole lives needing everybody to see them, needing everybody to know they're right, needing the credit and the recognition and the record to say their name. Rourke spent 22 years like that, and it made him deaf on the one morning it mattered. She looked at the young man. I stopped needing to be seen a long time ago. And it turns out that when you stop needing to be seen, you can see everything. You can count the wind for 41 days and nobody notices. You can build the answer to a thing nobody believes is coming. Being invisible wasn't the price I paid. By the end, it was the weapon. It was the whole weapon. Delgado sat with Red for a long time. You're going to tell that to the young ones someday, he said finally. Whoever comes up after us, you're going to teach them that. Avio looked at him and something moved behind her eyes because the boy had said out loud a thing she had not yet let herself think. 1,040 minutes, the resupply and reinforcement birds came at last, the ones the enemy had spent 41 days trying to isolate them from, and with them came the machinery of the aftermath. Fresh operators to hold the wire and intelligence team already asking about the signals. Element, a chaplain, and a personnel officer with a satellite phone and a list of names. And a decision, it turned out, that battalion had already made about Sergeant Ava Mitchell and was now waiting for her to make about herself. The personnel officer found her at the aid station cleaning it because the aid station was hers and it was a wreck, and cleaning it was the only thing left she knew how to do with her hands. He was a major, careful and quiet, and he sat down across from her and laid it out plain. Sergeant, the record's being reopened. What happened to you 2 years ago is going to be reviewed at a level that's going to make some people very uncomfortable, and by the time it's done, your qualifications, your real ones, are going to be unsealed and restored. He folded his hands, which means you have a choice to make, and I'm authorized to tell you that whichever way you go with the full backing of this command. You can go back to the program, back to the work, back to the rifle. They'll take you in a heartbeat after this morning, or, he paused. There's a second option, and I'll be honest, it's the one that's got the general's interest. What's the second option? Ava said, not stopping her cleaning. We stand up training, real training, for the corpsmen, for the young marksmen, for the operators who are going to sit on rocks like this one for the next 20 years and need to know how to read a valley before it kills them. And we put somebody in charge of it who can actually do the thing, who's actually done the thing, who spent 41 days on a fire base quietly proving that the difference between 16 dead men and 16 live ones is somebody who counted the wind when nobody asked her to. He looked at her steadily. The general's question, Sergeant, put simply, is this: do you want to go back to being the most dangerous person on a battlefield? Or do you want to teach the next 20 years of them how to be? And Ava Mitchell stopped cleaning. She sat down on the crate across from the major, and she was quiet for a long time. And she thought about the country she never named, and the operation that went bad, and the rifle they'd taken out of her hands, and the 2 years of gauze and silence and invisibility. She thought about the shot she'd made that morning, first round 840, the finest work of her career and the loneliest thing she owned. She thought about how it had felt to press that trigger, the old cold quiet, the world going still inside her. And then she thought about Ward learning to count the wind in the dark behind the generators without knowing what she was making of him. She thought about Delgado choosing her over Rourke on faith alone weeks before the day. She thought about Foss running for the cage and Bishop with his punctured canteen and a whole circle of men who'd moved half a second faster because they'd already believed. Half a second, the whole war, the entire margin. She had been the most dangerous person on the battlefield this morning. But that wasn't what had saved them, not really. What had saved them was that she'd spent 41 days making other people dangerous too quietly, one wind call at a time, and they'd never even known she was doing it. When I made the shot this morning, Ava said slowly, the one that took the sniper, it was the best shot of my life. And you know what I felt? Nothing, the same nothing I always feel. Cold and quiet and empty. And then the man's gone, and there's another problem. She looked at the major. But when Ward called me that wind, when the men moved on the gun, exactly like I'd built them to, when Delgado chose to believe me weeks before he had any proof, I felt something I have never felt behind a rifle in my entire life. She paused. I felt like I'd made something that would outlast me. A rifle makes one thing, it makes an ending. but a person you've taught to count the when that person goes and teaches somebody else, and that one teaches two more in 20 years from now, there's some kid on a rock like this one who's alive because of a chain of teaching that started with me, and I'll never even know his name. Her voice was very quiet and very steady and very certain. I've spent 2 years being ashamed of the best thing my hands could do. I'm not going back to it. I'm going to take the best thing I ever learned, and I'm going to give it away to as many of them as I can reach for, as long as they'll let me. That's my answer, Major. I'll teach. The Major nodded slowly, and something in his careful face softened because he'd hoped for exactly that answer and hadn't been sure he'd get it. The General said you'd say that. The General, Ava said, seems to know me better than I know myself, and I've never met him. He read Rourke's report 6 times. He said any operator who directs the defense of her own position and then refuses to have her name on the net, who lets her commander take the credit until he gives it to her, is exactly the person you want teaching the next generation, because she'll teach them the thing that can't be taught, which is that the work is the point and the credit is nothing. The Major stood. You'll get orders. It'll take time. The record's a mess, and untangling it will make some careers and end others. But it's happening. You're not going back in a box, Sergeant. You're going to build people. 1,120 minutes. He left, and Ava sat alone in her cleaned aid station for a while, and then she took the small green notebook out of her cargo pocket, the one that had held 41 days of wind, the one no one had ever thought to open, and she looked at it for a long time. Ward found her there. He'd been holding the perimeter being an officer, becoming in a single day the man he'd be for the rest of his career, and he came into the aid station and saw the notebook in her hands and understood. They offered you the way back, he said, to the program, to the rifle. They did. And I told them no. She turned the notebook over in her hands. I told them I'd teach. Corpsmen, young marksmen, kids who are going to sit on rocks like this for the next 20 years. I'm going to teach them to see the thing coming before it kills them, and to build the answer before anybody believes them, and to keep counting the wind even when everybody calls them a goat. She looked up at him. I'm going to teach them what you learned in the dark for 41 days without knowing you were learning it. Ward sat down across from her, the same crate he'd sat on the night she'd first told him the truth. You know what the strangest part of all this is? Rourke was right about one thing. On the first day, he said the firebase needed somebody to hold the gauze. He shook his head slowly. He just had no idea that the person holding the gauze was the most dangerous weapon on the whole mountain. That she'd been standing right there the entire time. That every day he walked past her and saw nothing. He was walking past the one person who was going to save every life on this rock. Skill ignored is still skill, Ava said quietly. That's the thing nobody understands until it's too late. You can call it bandage duty. You can lock it out of the weapons cage. You can bury the record and take the rifle and hide it in a medical tent for 2 years. And it's still there. It doesn't go away because you refuse to see it. It just waits. She closed the notebook. Silence isn't weakness, Lieutenant. It never was. I was never silent because I had nothing to say. I was silent because I was counting. And the whole time everybody thought I was nothing, I was becoming the exact thing they needed and couldn't see. Ward was quiet. Then he asked the last question, the one that had been sitting under all 41 days. Regret it? The 2 years letting them bury you, all that time being invisible when you could have fought it? And Ava Mitchell thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything. No, she said finally, because if I'd fought it 2 years ago, if I'd made them all see me, I'd have been somewhere else this morning. Some other assignment, some other rock. And there'd be 16 names on a casualty report from Firebase Ridgepoint, and Ward, one of them would have been yours. She looked at him. Every wrong thing that happened to me put me exactly where I needed to be on the one morning it mattered. I don't get to regret that. I don't get to regret being here. Not when here is the reason all of you are still breathing. She stood up and she zipped the green notebook back into her cargo pocket, where it had lived for 41 days, where nobody had ever thought to look, and she picked up the medical bag that had never once left her side through the entire worst morning of her life. And Caleb Ward, watching her, understood the thing the whole mountain had learned that day, the thing Rourke had learned with a bullet in his hip, and the general had learned from a report he had read 6 times, and every man who'd ever called her the doc, like a punchline, had learned in the space of a single morning of fire. The most dangerous person on the battlefield had never been the enemy on the ridge. It had never been the machine gun in the draw or the sniper who'd counted the wrong win. The most dangerous person on the battlefield was the woman everyone had spent 11 months refusing to see, the one who held the gauze, the one they called bandage duty, the one who had stood quietly in the corner of every room counting a war that hadn't started yet, building the answer to a question nobody else knew to ask, becoming in silence, in impatience, and in total invisibility, the single thread that every one of their lives would come to hang on. They never saw her coming. That was the whole point, and by the time they finally did, she had already saved them all, and she had already decided that the best thing left to do with the most dangerous skill in the world was to give it away quietly to the next ones for the rest of her life. Sergeant Ava Mitchell walked out of that aid station into the afternoon, and she was not invisible anymore, and she never would be again. Because the woman they never saw had become the woman they would never forget. 6 months later, at a training range on the other side of the world, a young corpsman named Reyes was about to quit. She had failed the wind call 3 times in a row. The target sat 400 meters downrange, a simple problem by the standards of the thing they were learning, and 3 times Reyes had read the flags wrong, and 3 times her round had gone wide, and now she was lying prone in the dirt with her jaw clenched and tears she refused to let fall burning in the corners of her eyes because she was the only woman in the class of 14 and she could feel the men behind her watching. And she knew exactly what they were thinking because it was the same thing men had thought about her since the day she'd enlisted. She's the medic. What's she doing on a long gun? Reyes. The voice came from behind her right shoulder, quiet and flat and calm. Stop. Take your eye off the scope. Look at me. Reyes rolled over, and Sergeant First Class Ava Mitchell was crouched beside her. No expression on her face, the same steady presence that had unnerved and steadied 14 students for 3 weeks straight, and Reyes braced herself for the correction. The disappointment, the polite version of, "You're not cut out for this," it didn't come. "You're not missing because you can't read wind," Ava said. "You're missing because you're reading it for them." She tilted her head back toward the men behind them. "Every time you get down behind that rifle, you're thinking about the 14 guys watching you fail. You're rushing the call so they'll stop looking at you. And a rushed call is a wrong call every single time." She leaned in. "You want to know a secret, Reyes? I spent 11 months on a fire base where every man there called me the doc like it was a joke. Bandage duty. They wouldn't let me touch a weapon. And I let them think whatever they wanted because I figured out something that's going to save your life if you let it." Reyes wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist, angry at herself for it. "What? They don't get a vote." Ava said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "The wind doesn't care who's watching you. The target doesn't care that you're the only woman in the class. The valley doesn't care what 14 men think about whether you belong here. There's only you, the rifle, and the math. And the math is the same whether they respect you or laugh at you. So stop shooting for them. Shoot for the math. Count the win like there's nobody on this range but you and the target. Because when it counts, when it really counts, there won't be." She stood. "Now get back down. And this time I don't want you to hurry. I want you to be slow. I want you to be so slow it makes them uncomfortable. Take all the time in the world. Count it 3 times if you have to. And then make the call you actually believe, not the one you think will get them to stop looking." Reyes got back down behind the rifle, and she did what the sergeant said. She took her time. She read the near flag, the mid flag, the far flag. She felt the men behind her get restless, felt the pressure to hurry, and she remembered they don't get a vote, and she let the pressure roll off her like water finding its level, and she made the call she actually believed. The round hit center. She made the next one too, and the one after that. And by the end of the afternoon, Reyes had put 8 straight rounds into a target that had beaten her all morning. And when she finally rolled off the rifle and looked back, the 14 men weren't laughing anymore. They were watching the way you watch someone who's just figured out a thing you're still struggling with. And one of them, a big kid named Torres, who'd been the loudest all week, said quietly, "How'd she do that? She couldn't hit it this morning." And Ava Mitchell, standing at the back of the range with her arms crossed, said loud enough for all 14 of them to hear, "She stopped shooting for you, Kavem." You should try it. Half of you are missing for the exact same reason she was. The range went quiet. And then one by one, 14 young corpsmen and marksmen got very thoughtful because the sergeant had just named the thing. None of them had been willing to say out loud, which was that they were all, every one of them, more worried about being seen than about being right. That was the thing she taught them. Not just the wind, though she taught them the wind better than anyone alive. Not just the math, though her students left knowing math that operators twice their age had never learned. What she taught them, the thing that spread out from that range like ripples on water, was the discipline of not needing to be seen. The patience of counting when nobody's asking you to. The strength of silence that isn't weakness, but is instead a person quietly becoming the exact thing that will matter most on the day it matters at all. She never told them the whole story. She never named the fire base or the ridge or the sniper who'd counted the wrong wind. She never told them about the 41 days or the general's voice coming down a mountain or the 2 years she'd spent believing she deserved to disappear. But she told them pieces of it in the moments when a student was about to quit, in the quiet corrections at the back of the range, and the pieces added up in their heads into a legend that grew larger every class. The story of an instructor who'd supposedly done something extraordinary, somewhere nobody could name, who'd been underestimated by everyone and had let them underestimate her right up until the moment it would have cost lives, and then had risen up out of nowhere and been the most dangerous person on the field. They were right, of course. They just never got the details. And Ava preferred it that way because the details had never been the point. The point had always been the teaching. A year into it, a letter came. It came through official channels, forwarded 3 times, and it was from Daniel Rourke. He'd medically retired from the hip wound, walked with a cane now, and he'd taken a long time to write it, she could tell, because the handwriting was careful in the way of a man who'd started over several times. She read it standing at the edge of the range while a new class ran their morning wind logs behind her. He didn't apologize again. He'd already done that on the berm, and he was too much of an operator to think saying it twice made it count more. Instead, he told her what he'd been doing since. He'd started talking to young leaders. He wrote senior enlisted and junior officers at schools and courses, and he'd found himself telling them one story over and over, and it wasn't a story about a battle. It was a story about a man who'd been so certain he was the smartest person in every room that he'd gone deaf to the one voice that could have saved him grief, and how that man had learned with a bullet in his hip and his fire base nearly overrun that the most dangerous kind of wrong is the kind you can't hear because it's coming from someone you've decided doesn't matter. I tell them about you, he wrote, though I don't use your name because I know you wouldn't want it. I tell them that the best soldier I ever served with spent 11 months letting me treat her like nothing, and that she saved my life anyway and never once asked me to feel bad about it. I tell them that if they walk away from my talk with one thing, it should be this: the person you're ignoring might be the person who's about to save you. Learn to listen to the people you've decided not to see. It's the only lesson I've got that's worth anything, and I had to nearly die to learn it, and I learned it from a corpsman I called bandage duty. The letter ended simply: you were right about all of it. You always were, and I've stopped needing the last word, which is the thing you taught me without ever trying to. Thank you, Sergeant. Go build them good. Ava folded the letter and put it in her pocket next to the small green notebook. She still carried the one that had held 41 days of wind, the one she'd never thrown away. And she went back to the range where a young corpsman was about to read the wind wrong, and she crouched down beside them and said quiet and flat and calm, "Stop. Take your eye off the scope. Look at me." Ward made rank fast after Ridge Point, the way men do when they have been through the fire and come out clear. He wrote her sometimes and visited once and stood at the back of her range, watching her teach with an expression she recognized, because it was the same expression he'd worn on that first night in the medical tent when he'd started to figure out what she was. "You know what I think about," he told her over coffee after the class had gone. "I think about how close it came. If I hadn't noticed you range that tree line, if you hadn't decided to teach me the wind in the dark, if Delgado hadn't chosen to believe you. Half a second here, half a second there." He shook his head. "You always said it. Half a second was the whole war. I didn't understand it then. I do now. Everything came down to the margins you built when nobody was watching." "That's the whole thing, Lieutenant," Ava said. She still called him Lieutenant, sometimes though he'd long outranked it, and he never corrected her because he liked being the version of himself he'd been when she'd made him into a spotter in the dark. Every one of these kids I teach, I'm building them a half second of seeing it before it comes, a half second of believing themselves when nobody else will, a half second of being ready when the moment finally arrives. And most of them will never need it. They'll go their whole careers and never know I gave them anything at all. She looked out at the empty range. But some of them will need it. Someday on some rock, I'll never see one of these kids is going to have a half second that saves a whole patrol, and they won't even remember it came from a class they took years ago from an instructor who wouldn't tell them her story, and I'll never know his name. And that's the most beautiful thing I can imagine doing with the rest of my life. Ward was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You found it, didn't you? The thing you were looking for. Behind the rifle, you felt nothing, but this." "This," Ava agreed. "The rifle makes an ending. This makes a beginning. I spent 2 years thinking the best thing my hands could do was something I had to be ashamed of. And it turns out the best thing my hands can do is put them on a young shooter's shoulder and steady it and say, 'Slow down, count the wind. You don't need them to see you. You just need to be right.'" She smiled, and it was a real one, the kind she'd never had room for on the mountain. I was the woman they never saw. Now I spend my life making sure the next ones learn that being unseen is a gift, right up until the day you decide to be seen, and by then it's too late for anyone to stop you. She stood and gathered her gear and walked out toward the range where tomorrow's class would gather at dawn, 14 more young people who didn't yet know how to count the wind, who didn't yet know that the person they'd underestimate was often the person who'd save them, who didn't yet know that silence could be the deadliest weapon of all if you had the patience to carry it. She would teach them, one at a time, one wine call at a time, for the rest of her life. Because the woman they never saw had learned the only lesson worth passing down, that skill ignored is still skill, that underestimation always has a cost, and that true capability never announces itself. It waits, it counts, and when the moment finally comes, it does not ask permission. It simply saves everyone, and then it turns around and teaches the next one to do the same. That was Ava Mitchell's whole answer to the 2 years they'd tried to erase her, and it was the finest work her hands ever did, and it would outlast her by 50 years and 1,000 names she'd never know. She had been forced to pretend she wasn't a warrior. She spent the rest of her life making warriors instead. And that was the victory the enemy on the ridge never understood, that Rourke learned too late, and that 14 young shooters at a time would carry forward into every valley that ever tried to swallow them whole.